I just wanted to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar today on our domestic trucking tips and tricks. I just want to let you know that it is an interactive webinar and Q&A session. So we're here to answer your questions. So you guys can submit those. You can start submitting them right now. You can submit them anytime throughout the webinar. All you do is there is a little Q&A button at the top or bottom of your screen, and go ahead and click on that. You guys can submit them anonymously as well if you don't care for anybody to see who's asking the question. And if we do not get to your questions today, we will definitely be following up with you and answer those questions to you directly outside of this webinar. So while you are submitting your questions and getting acclimated with your screens, I'm going to talk about Scarborough just for a minute. Scarborough is a full-service international and domestic transportation provider. We are a U.S. and Mexican customs broker, and we offer warehouse and fulfillment services as well. We're known for our expertise in customized solutions, and we are headquartered in the heart of America in Kansas City with offices across the USA. We also have partners in every major port in the world. We do have our own assets in the Midwest, and we also have a domestic brokerage team to service all of North America. Today, we are lucky to have with us, we've got Tony Harrelson. He is our domestic operations manager for Scarborough Transportation. And we also have Luigi DeMaio. He is the owner and CEO of R2R Intermodal, which is a very close partner of us and a dray service provider. And he is based in Chicago. Thank you again, Luigi, for providing your services to us and our clients, and for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Tony, for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. I am going to turn it over to Tony right now to talk about the basics of domestic trucking, and you guys continue to submit your questions, and I guess let's talk about trucking.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kim. Okay, so today we're going to go over, like she said, the basics of domestic transportation. We'll hit on all varieties, LTL and truckload. We're going to start off with some types, terms, and modes of different transportation. And we're going to also look at the quoting requirements and then at classifying LTL freight. And then we'll look into some of the daily challenges that the drivers face while they're out there on the road. All right, so we have types of drivers. So there's several different types of drivers out there. We have draymen. Draymen are going to be the drivers out there going to and from the rail yards or the ports, delivering either the rail containers or ocean-going containers. We also have local drivers. Those drivers are going to mainly service roughly a 200-mile radius of their home terminal, making pickups and deliveries. Over-the-road drivers, they will cross the country. They can also cross into Canada. And so those are the ones that basically cover the whole United States. Team drivers will also be included in that over-the-road category. The advantage of the team drivers is the extra driver to take over when the first driver's hours run out. And then we have the courier or small parcel drivers. Those are the drivers. They're basically local drivers too, but they're going to have the sprinter vans or small box trucks. Then we have the different types of equipment. We have dry vans. That's the main or the most common trailer you'll see out there. Then we have the sprinter vans, straight trucks, and hot shots. Those are there usually for those expedited shipments. The sprinter vans, they're not usually dock high, so that's one thing to keep in mind. If you do have to load it from a dock, you'll probably need the straight truck. We have the refrigerated trailers. Those are for your temperature control loads. They could be for frozen. They could be for refrigerated, or just sometimes in the summer you'll need them just to keep them below a certain temperature. Rail containers, those are going to be your containers that are on the rail. Most often they are 40 or 53-foot dry van trailers. They do have some refrigerated rail containers. Then we have the ocean containers. You can have the 20-foot, 40-foot, 40-foot high cube, and the 45 length with the standard chassis and triaxles. And then finally, in the open trailer group, we have the flatbeds, step decks, RGNs, and double drops. Those are for your large overdimensional objects. Luigi, do you have anything on the ocean containers you'd like to add?
Yeah, pretty much. These are, we have the majority, most of them, I would say 75–80% are 20s and 40s. And then you're probably going to touch these later, but sometimes the cargo can be hazardous, and that requires a different type of driver with hazardous endorsement on the driver's license. But yeah, this is a very good overview of all type of equipment used in intermodal drayage. Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome. Okay. So here we are at some different terms that you may encounter with pickup and delivery appointments. It means the shipper or the receiver requires specific appointment time for the driver to be loaded or unloaded. Live unload and drop and hook. Live unload, the driver stays with the trailer and is unloaded while he's in the dock, versus a drop and hook where the driver would come in, he would drop the trailer. Usually the carrier would have a trailer pull established there. They would drop their loaded, take it empty, and then leave. Or pick up another loaded trailer while they're there.
What's the difference in cost if you do a live unload and a drop and hook?
So with a live unload, you will avoid some of the detention charges that are possible. So usually the industry standard is 2 free hours when it comes to over the road. So if you're doing a drop and hook, the driver will be in and out quickly, and he can be back on the road and not losing time sitting at a dock.
Okay.
Luigi, I'll let you kind of, the next 3 are kind of around the intermodal.
Sure. Yeah, this is a very good point here. We're going to talk about. It's very, I think it's very critical for all parties involved in the transportation to have a clear understanding from the get-go whether a shipment, let's say that comes import into the United States, let's say is delivered into Kansas City door. It's very important to know in advance, to have an understanding with the receiver, with the warehouse, whether, you know, that they should know in advance, is the cargo palletized, how long does it take to unload, get an exact understanding of the weight, because, you know, an excess weight on the, you know, if the container turns out to be heavier than declared, there is a complication, there could be a complication in the transportation, especially if the truck has to go through a weigh station and if it gets pulled over for an inspection and if the weight is over what declared, then. So going back to terms here, yeah, as you say, the Tony, live unload is, I would say, is the most common term of transportation. The driver is waiting by the truck, and when the cargo is fully unloaded, then he backs out of the dock, he closes the container doors, and he returns the empty container unless there is a street turn. We could have a street turn for a live load, and we can also have a street turn for a drop and hook. A drop and hook, the driver drops a loaded container by the dock, and he picks up an empty a container that was previously dropped loaded and is now empty. So all empty containers picked up from a warehouse could qualify for a street turn if the street turn is approved by the steamship line. Street turn is basically could be the freight forwarder, also the trucking company. We can all request a street turn to the steamship lines, meaning we can reuse an import container for an export. So there is a procedure to get a street turn done. So basically, the steamship line is the final party in the process that approves the street turn, because sometimes
Luigi, I was just going to ask, what's the benefit of using a street turn?
Yeah, there are several benefits. Could be mostly it's like a green, now we're trying to save, to reduce pollution, and it also saves miles on the truck, because now, let's say that there is no street turn and the driver unloads, let's say the driver picks up an import container at CSX in Kansas City, and he delivers in Topeka. Now the driver, after the delivery in Topeka, has to come back empty to return the empty container to the depot. Instead, if the truck carrier or the steamship line or the freight, there are several platforms that they provide street turn solutions. If the container can become a street turn, now the driver doesn't need to drive all the way back with the empty container. He doesn't need to spend time to get the empty container. There is no lift involved in case the empty container needs to be taken off the chassis and stacked in the yard. The driver goes and reuses the same container for an export. It's a win-win situation for everybody involved in the transportation process, because it saves time, and also we know that there is a truck shortage. It's not the easiest thing to find a truck available. With a street turn, we enable a truck to become available the same day of the import unloaded. So it's pretty much a win-win situation in all aspects of the transportation.
Great, that was a great explanation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you, Don.
Here are some common LTL accessorials and terms. Liftgate. Liftgate is just an apparatus at the back of the truck or trailer, and it basically lowers the freight to the ground. So you would use it in situations there wasn't a dock or someone available with a forklift to unload the pallets. Residential delivery, pretty much just like it sounds, it's a delivery to a residence. One kind of tricky point, I've had it come up a few times at home businesses. It's still a residential delivery, even though it's a business at a residence. So yes, residential deliveries are basically delivery in a residential area. Inside delivery. So on a residential delivery, usually it's curbside or it's dropped at the curb or in the driveway. With an inside delivery, it's taken into the garage. If it's at a business, sometimes it's taken, they need the driver to take it not just to the dock, but take it out onto the floor. That would be your inside delivery. Over length, that would, with the LTL industry the way it is now, most carriers have changed to an 8-foot limit. So anytime you have a single piece that's over 8 foot long, there are extra charges that will be applied by the carrier. And they are incremental usually, and every carrier has a different breakdown, but we can quote those out as they come in. Limited access usually applies to locations such as schools, hotels, construction sites, airports. Any place with a gated access sometimes will qualify as a limited access. So those types of places usually have extra accessorial fees applied. Sometimes it may require a straight truck for delivery versus a regular pup. So that's why those fees usually are there.
What about a business that they have a dock door, but it's really difficult to get to the dock door? They have to go down a narrow alley to get to it. It's kind of a difficult place to get into. Oftentimes
you may see the limited access applied in those situations as well. Sometimes it'll vary from carrier to carrier. Some are a little bit more lenient than others, but a lot of times that could incur the limited access fee as well. And then lastly, the CFS, or the container freight station. So those are for the shipments that came in on an ocean going container and have been broken down and are then ready to be taken out for delivery. Or it could work in the opposite too. You're taking it there and dropping it off for a consolidation on an export front.
Okay. So I've already received a question in regards to reference sheets. Scarborough does have a lot of reference guides for both domestic and international dimensions on inside of containers and truck equipment and that type of stuff. I will be sending out this presentation after it's done, probably within the next week or so, along with some links to some of those guides. So I hope that that answers that question. You guys are welcome to send emails to us anytime as well, and we can help you out there.
And Kim and Tony, to the point you made for accessory charges on residential deliveries, we do receive at times requests to deliver intermodal drayage containers to a residential area. These accessory charges, actually, that they do. When an intermodal drayage container is taken to a residential area, there are a lot of there could be a lot of complications because let's say going to a residential area, the weight sometimes there is a restricted weight. So 80,000 pound truck and trailer is not allowed to go normally in residential areas. There could be low bridges as well. So the accessorials explain all these extra tasks and jobs that they need to be run by dispatchers of a trucking company and by the driver as well, to make sure that he has bridge clearances, that the weight on the roads going to the residential area, they legal, and sometimes the trucking company has to get a weight permit, has to get a permit from the township or from the city hall to bring a heavier truck for delivery. So,
and I would say in those cases, in the cases that it's not as difficult to maybe use a transload service to go to a container freight station, a warehouse that could transload that the items in that container into a truck.
Correct.
Maybe to solve that issue.
Correct. Yeah, in case the 40-foot container cannot go there, then there is a transload, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so different modes of transport. This is a common question we get quite a lot. So truckload can hold up to 26 pallets on the floor. Those are standard size pallets. If you can double stack, you can get up to 52. Max weight averages out between 43,500 and 44,000 pounds. Quotes for these a lot of times can be affected by market trends. If it's produce season in a given area, all these things can affect the rates. And then as far as transit time is usually fairly good. Your only delays typically would involve breakdowns or weather delays. Those are usually the two biggest common factors for delays in the truckload market. Next step down would be your volume shipments. These are going to be your 6 pallets or more, usually over 45,000 pounds. It'll take up between 12 and 32 linear feet. These are usually almost always a spot quote with the LTL carrier. They range. We have some carriers they're good for 3 days, some up to a week. So it just kind of varies on the carrier. And then these can incur delays at the different break bulk locations for the LTL carriers as they move through their system. They're usually at a lower priority than their LTL shipments. Then lastly, you have your LTL shipments. These are your 1 to 5 pallets under 5,000 pounds. These are set on negotiated rates with the LTL carriers. As long as we have the pickup in by a certain time, generally speaking, it can be made the same day. Transit time and delays transit time will depend on obviously the distance involved, and delays could be anything from weather to terminal delays. Now, there's not a hard, fast line between any of these three categories. It's a very gray area. Sometimes we can still get LTL pricing on shipments over 5 pallets, and sometimes you can ship 10, 15 pallets truckload at the same price it would cost for a volume shipment. So it's kind of a gray area between them. We're always happy to sit down and look at each scenario and see which one is the best fit for that particular shipment that would best serve you.
When it comes to delays, would you say that like a dedicated truckload, you'd be less likely to have a delay if you were moving LTL freight?
Yes, you would have less delays.
So if you've got something hot and you've only got, let's say, 4 pallets, would I ask for a dedicated truckload in that case?
We can do that. On the LTL side, you can get guaranteed deliveries. So that is one thing we can look at. Several of the LTL carriers will offer a guaranteed delivery. The tricky side of that is not always a guaranteed pickup. So yes, a lot of times you may be better for the dedicated option, but we can always price it out and get the LTL carriers guaranteed by 5, by 3. Several of them have several different options, so we can take a look at them and see which is best.
Is there a difference between a dedicated truck or guaranteed LTL and a hot shot shipment?
Your hot shot shipment would kind of fall under the same category as your truckloads since it's dedicated and you're not mixing anybody else's freight with it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for when we're quoting shipments on the LTL side, the biggest thing is to have the origin and destination zip codes, the number of handling units, if it's loose or palletized. If you have the MFC in class already, that is fantastic. If not, a good commodity description so that we can look it up. And then your total weight. It's best if we can have dimensions for each individual shipping unit. And then also need to know any accessorials that would be needed, like a lift gate, limited access, residential, for the shipment, so we can get accurate quoting. On the truckload side, the origin and destination zip codes, what kind of time frame you're on, when does it need to be picked up, when does it need to be delivered, the commodity, so we know what we're dealing with there, find out if it's hazmat, not hazmat, the weight, make sure we're at a legal weight, and then of course any loading or delivery requirements. Is it an appointment location, is it first come first serve? Those are the things we look at there for the full truckload.
Awesome. I do have another question that just came in regards to the LTL. Is there a general rule of how much space can ship floor loaded on an LTL?
So most of your LTL shipments, if it's going to be loose, I would probably try to keep it probably under, I would say 5 to 10 linear feet in there. I mean, we can get volume pricing if it's over that, but I would say if it's going to be loose, then we probably are going to end up being in a volume situation there. And a lot of times your LTL carriers are going to want nice packaged palletized freight. The loose freight sometimes can be a little bit more difficult with the LTL carriers.
And I mean, this is just me playing devil's advocate. Why would I ship loose pieces LTL versus using like UPS and shipping loose pieces using UPS?
On the small package front.
Uh-huh.
So if you're going to have loose pieces in a small pack scenario, you're probably better off to go small pack. If you're having individual boxes on an LTL shipment, there's a greater chance for damage, number one. If you've ever seen inside one of these LTL trailers, there's stuff stacked in there, and loose boxes just have a higher chance of being damaged. If you are going to put them on an LTL, I would recommend putting them on a pallet. That way they're somewhat protected. Also, they're less likely to get separated and lost if they're at least put together on a pallet.
So what if my company doesn't have access to placing those boxes and shrink wrapping that?
There are companies that can do that. They can come out and bring pallets and wrap stuff up. We've done those quotes for people in the past, so we can get that service arranged for people as well.
Awesome. Terrific. All right, great, let's move on.
Okay, so classifying freight. There are 18 NMFC classes. If you're not familiar with the term NMFC, that is just the National Motor Freight Classification. There's a large book and an online version that you can subscribe to. I usually tend to favor the online version a little bit better because it's kept up to date. You don't worry about ordering the next edition and having it on the shelf. It's always available there online, and it's updated automatically because they do change classes and NMFC numbers from time to time. Generally speaking, the lower the number, the lower the cost. And on the way they determine their classification, they're based on basically density, ease of handling, stowability, and liability. Value does play into it as well, but the four main ones are the density, ease of handling, stowability, and liability. And we'll get into a few examples here in a moment. So we'll look at the density-based items for classification just because they're a little bit more complicated. Some commodities don't require density to determine their class. Some commodities are just a straight class. For instance, if you're shipping alcohol, it's a straight class. It doesn't matter what the pounds per cubic feet is. It's the same class regardless of what the density equals out to. Other commodities do require the class to be determined by density. So we'll go through that example here. More dense items such as steel or machinery will have lower classes than your fragile items, which are going to have a higher class. And provided here is the formula on how to figure density. This is assuming that your dimensions are in inches. That's where the 1728 comes from, so you can convert it back over to feet. If your measurements are in feet, you can disregard the 1728 part of the equation and then figure out your density. And we'll go through an example here.
I think since we do have some more questions and stuff, maybe we'll just we'll just send out this presentation. You guys can see the examples here. And then if you guys have specific questions about how to classify the density-based commodities and classifying your NMFC, is that right?
Yep.
NMFC classification, we can definitely help you with that. And I think that Tony's also going to talk about another tool that you can use to classify those also.
Okay, so one tool that Scarborough has available is we now have a portal for our customers to go to, and they can quote their LTL shipments. So we can get you set up with a login where you can come in, you can put in your shipment information and hit retrieve rates, and it will bring back your rates. And where this plays into classification is we can set up your product listing in the website, in your portal, so all your product is already there. So that as you run through and you start to enter your shipment, you'll get to a drop down, and we'll see it here in just a second. You can select the commodity and move on. You don't have to worry about looking it up.
And then what if we have like our own carrier contracts and you want to talk about that?
Sure. So we do have the availability to upload your tariffs as well. So if you have your own LTL tariffs, we can have those uploaded into the system as well, so that when you retrieve a rate, you will get back our rates as well as yours, or we can have it set up where it just pulls back your rates. And so they are there. You can tell when you look at the rates whose tariffs they are. We can show you how to do all that, and then you'll know if you're using your rate or our rate. And you can book on your tariffs, so you don't have to just use ours. And then once you're in here, you can quote, book, and track, and do it 24/7.
Do you receive the quote instantaneously, or do we, as a client, would I wait for my quote to be emailed to me?
Yeah, so if you're doing it on the portal, it is instant for those true LTL shipments, the 5 pallets and under. If you're going to get into a volume shipment, you do need to send us a message so we can get it spot quoted on a volume basis. But if it's a true LTL shipment, you will have it instantly.
Okay.
So here is a screenshot of inside the order entry screen, and you'll see where the description is there. So we can preload all these for you. Here's an example of the clothing NMFC. Clothing is a density-based item. As you can see, we've already preloaded for this customer all the different subgroups for clothing, so that when they go to enter a load, all they have to do is enter the pieces, the weight, and the dimensions. And then out to the side here, it's kind of off the screen, it will tell you what the PCF is, or the pounds per cubic feet. And you can see here next to each listing, we've listed what it is. If it's 1 but less than 2, 10 but less than 12, you can easily find it. You don't have to worry about looking it up in the book or going to the website, looking it up. It's already built in your portal. It's there for you. We can add any of the commodities that are there in the NMFC guide and have them ready to go for you. Here's an example of the way to get there. So if you enter your pieces and weight, you skip typing the description in our portal and you put in the dimensions, it will give you an estimated class. So there's another advantage to the system. If it's an instance where you don't know specifically what it is, you can get an estimated class from the system as well, if you're not sure exactly what the commodity is.
So that does, that sort of answers a couple of questions that I've had come in. I've had several different companies send me the fact that they have a common problem finding out what their shipping class is. So I would say that this would be a great solution for you guys to get a log into this LTL portal and start using the system in that regards, just to help kind of estimate your class or get your true NMFC class from it. And then you guys can also always contact Tony to help you with your NMFC classification as well.
Most definitely. Okay, there's some, I know there's, I don't know how many people out there are going to need to do estimated quotes based off CBMs.
Yeah, and I do think we have like a lot of international clients that are on this call, so I think that this is a great screen for you guys to use as a reference as well.
Good deal. So there is a way to estimate your class from CBMs. It is an estimate. I like to put that disclaimer in there, but it's usually fairly accurate. So in this example, we know we have 41 pieces, we know a weight, and we know a CBMs. So the first thing we need to do is convert that CBM into cubic feet. So the 6.9 becomes 244. Then we take the 244 divided by 93. 93 is the maximum height for a standard 40 by 48 pallet. So that's where this as an estimate comes in. We're estimating that it's stacked at the highest limit possible on the pallet. So you divide that out by 93, that tells you we're going to have 2.6 pallets. So just round that off to 3 pallets for the shipment. Obviously, the point in there, if your product can't stack that high, you can adjust that number. If you know how high it normally is stacked, you can adjust that to kind of narrow down your estimation on the pallets. But it gives you a good ballpark idea of how many pallets it can be.
Perfect. I think that's a great reference.
Okay, so when they use full truckload services.
Did you have something to say, Luigi?
No, not on this.
Right, perfect.
So if your shipment obviously fills a full trailer, full truckload would be the way to go. Truckload service can sometimes be more cost effective than a volume service. Your volume service may not be the best if you have a deadline. So if it's a hard deadline, you may be better off to go truckload, where you're not relying on that LTL carrier to get it through, 2, 3 different terminals en route. It's just going to pick up from point A and go to point B. If it's a longer distance, we can look at team service. So you have a few more options there to help meet deadlines. If it's not a particularly big shipment, then you can look at the hot shots or sprinter vans, or you can look at the full truckload if it's a larger shipment. Also, if it's a fragile product, something that the less handling, the better. Sometimes truckload may be the way to go. Keep in mind when you're shipping something LTL, how many times that product is handled. It's picked up at your dock, it's then unloaded at the carrier's terminal, and then depending on how far it's going, it could go through, just one if it's from here to Chicago, but if it's going across country, it could hit several different terminals along the way and be loaded and unloaded several different times. So it could be handled several times, which just increases the chance for damage. When it comes to full truckload service, they're often transactional or going off the spot market. If there are higher volumes in play, or it's going to be a steady volume, contracted rates are definitely available. We do have some customers with contracted rates on the truckload side, and we have others that are on spot rates. It just kind of depends on what best fits your business. Available capacity for the truck market. It can be affected by season, produce season. Produce season is going on in the Southeast right now. It will be also hits the California and South Texas areas pretty hard. So these seasonal swings definitely affect the availability of drivers in the full market, in the full truckload market. Natural disasters obviously can affect the truckload, as well as strikes. If you have a port strike or auto worker strike in your delivered automotive plants, it can affect it there. Then we have load requirements that will affect the rates, hazmat and tanker endorsements. So that is a added endorsement the drivers have to have on their driver's license. So therefore it's usually an extra cost. There's fewer of those drivers available. And then the team drivers, obviously you're paying 2 drivers versus 1 for the shipment there. One thing on the tanker endorsements, tanker endorsement, shipments can be tanker endorsed and not hazmat, or they can be hazmat and tanker endorsed. The tanker endorsement is determined by how many gallons you're shipping and the size of container that it's in. And that will determine whether a tanker endorsement is needed.
I've got 2 questions in regards to hazmat items.
Okay.
One is, what's your policy for hazmat items? And then the other question is, what is the weight limit for requiring hazmat endorsements?
Okay. So on the weight limit, it's below 1,000 pounds. You are generally not required to have the shipment placarded. And then on the, what was that one?
What is your policy for hazmat items?
Can definitely help set up in hazmat shipments. We usually like to receive the MSDS for the shipment, so we have a good description of exactly what we're dealing with, know what placards are required. That way we can let the carriers know there. Okay. Trucking
If I can add,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, if I want to add to the slide you just spoke about, yeah, this one here, full container loads. Yeah, rates are kind of with the intermodal drayage companies, rates are like spot rates are normally based on whether or not there is a high volume of cargo coming from overseas or not. And with regard to hazardous containers, as you were talking about it, it happens at times that containers from overseas, they're shipped without removing placards that they were previously put on the container for the shipment that was done prior to the current booking. So basically what I want to say is when cargo is loaded overseas, let's say we're talking about an import shipment coming to the US, the warehouse overseas they have to understand that the containers to be clean outside, there has to be clear of placards of everything else, because it happened that we send a driver, we're supposed to pick up a non-hazardous load, and now the containers got an old placard that now we're dealing with delays, rail detention, and possible rescheduling of the appointment because of that. So there has to be a mutual understanding between the warehouse overseas and the booking agent overseas as to properly load the container, follow procedures thoroughly.
Okay. One other clarification on the question about the weight. So the packaging will still need to have any kind of or hazmat labeling on the actual packages, even if it's under 1,000 pounds, but the whole trailer as itself wouldn't have to carry a placard if it's under 1,000 pounds. So I just want to make that little clarification there. Okay, so some trucking tips to help make a driver's life easier, and Luigi can weigh in on some of these, I'm sure. So be flexible when possible. It's always a little bit nicer for a driver to have a first come first serve facility versus a firm appointment. I understand that there's times when certain facilities need to go by appointments to keep everything kind of moving in a timely fashion to avoid everybody from showing up at one time. But if a driver arrives early, it's nice if he can be worked in, even if it's on an appointment schedule. Having flexibility with the loading and delivery windows, it kind of hits on that. If somebody arrives early and you have the time, it's nice to get them undone and on the road, since they are working with a limited clock each day on their logbooks. Flexibility in transit time is nice, especially when you're working with those spot loads, and if capacity is tight in an area, if we have a day or two to get it scheduled or picked up, it just makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, Tony, if I can add to your point
Sure.
here. I was talking just a few days ago, I was talking to a friend. He also owns an intermodal drayage tracking company. And, we are talking about, to us, to a tracking company, the freight forwarder, of course, is very important. But we also now taking into account warehouses, because the same warehouse can ship through multiple freight forwarding companies or through a steamship line. So there's been talks where the trucking industry even wants to create an app similar to Yelp, where warehouses are rated based on how easy for a driver is to go in and out. Are they flexible? Is the warehouse flexible if the driver is late due to a delay at the railroad because there were no chassis available and now the driver had to wait? So regardless of who the freight forwarder is or the steamship line involved, warehouses are also now being taken into consideration by a truck driver, because truck drivers all talk to each other and they kind of know whether a warehouse is easy, friendly to go unload and come back, as opposed they're very rigid. And if the driver is late like 20 minutes, now he has to wait 4 hours because he missed this slot. So it's good to kind of have an understanding on this type of delays, and the flexibility that you and Kim put on the slide makes a lot of sense.
Yes, thank you. Yes, being in the industry as long as I have, I've definitely ran into those facilities, grocery store warehouses, and in other locations that are really restrictive on their receiving hours. And like Luigi was saying, drivers do talk. They do know which facilities are, driver friendly and not. So
you're telling me it's harder to find a driver to go to those facilities without drivers?
Yes. So in short, if you're delivering to a certain facility, it may be harder to get a driver to go there.
And then again, sorry, Tony. Then again, it all depends also on if the market is soft, there is not much freight around. So drivers are now looking for work, because it's not always driver shortage. There are times where slow times, there's not enough cargo coming in to deliver. But what to believe, Tony, you experience the same. Normally, it's more often harder to find a driver than a driver is calling you to asking for work. So.
Yes, very true. Okay, we kind of hit on the 3 differences. If you have any questions on which may be the best type, feel free to reach out and ask us. We'll be happy to walk through it and give you the different options, which would be the best, whether it be LTL, full truckload, or volume.
Now, if our clients do give you number of pieces, but they don't tell you exactly what type of shipment they want, do you just take that into consideration and give them a quote based on what you consider? Right.
So if someone just came to me and these 3 pallets and need to be moved from point A to point B, I'm probably going to start out and just give you an LTL rate. If it's a little bit larger, I may give you both an LTL and a volume. But generally speaking, when we hear how many pallets and weights it is, we generally know what it needs to be. So again, if you're unsure, just ask us and we'll be happy to help you out. Okay, the routing. So if you're going to have a shipment that may be exiting, let us know. We can get you in touch with someone over here on our international side, and they can help you with any routing options that you would need.
So if you're having any pains with your trucking, you can easily talk to somebody on Scarborough International's team or your international freight forwarder about maybe consider routing that differently internationally, so it's coming into a different port. You can talk to people about that.
Other tips, sharing it. So information is the key when we're doing quotes. The more information that we have, the better, and the more accurate the quote will be. So when you're giving us the information, again, the more the information you have, the better, so that we can get you that accurate quote as quickly as possible. Lead time when it comes to the shipment is nice. The more time we have to plan, the better. Sometimes that will lead to more competitive rates or lower rates if we have some time to plan versus reacting at the last minute. We all know those situations happen. We understand that. But sometimes when you can plan ahead, that does help with cost a little bit. On the be empathetic and understanding to all those involved in your supply chain. There are a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes. It's kind of our job to handle all that and kind of protect you or buffer you from it. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that you're not always aware of. So just yeah, a little empathetic towards those handling your shipments, whether it be domestically or internationally, because there's a lot going on behind the scenes sometimes.
Luigi, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, what I want to add is correct. I mean, Tony, you made a good point about being understanding, because intermodal drayage and truck drivers and the stress involved at the railroad or at the port to pick up a load. There is a lot going on. So, like myself, if I were an importer, I would book the entire intermodal with the freight forwarder directly through the door. I wouldn't really be trying myself to look for a trucking company, because a trucking company, because of the complexity you just explained that happens behind the scenes, a trucking company wants to work with a freight forwarder like Scarborough. You guys have good volume. You guys are you have been doing this for a long time. You know everything involved, and it's much easier for a trucking company to have a relationship with a business like you guys, like Scarborough. That you guys you do this on a regular basis, as opposed to dealing with an importer. It would take much more time for a trucking company to receive instructions. There is a lot of communications that has to happen back and forth between the freight forwarder and the trucking company, like delivery order, work order, rates, pickup numbers, last 3 days, the marriage last 3 days, and it's much easier when the parties involved do this on a regular basis. And that's why a freight forwarder, to me, is the best way to book a shipment directly to the door.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, some other challenges that are out there are the ELD mandate that went into effect a while back in the hours of service, tolls, parking, drivers being able to find available parking. With the hours of service the way they are, if a driver can sleep in a lot where he's going to be loading or unloading, is advantageous, because if the nearest truck stop is 20 minutes away, that's just starting his clock that much earlier and getting it started, versus it being able to start after he's either unloaded or loaded. So that helps preserve some of their hours for the day. And then, of course, the driver shortage, which has been mentioned, and the border delays. Luigi, if you have some more on the hours of service, this would be a...
Sure. Hours of service, well, what we all know what happened when DLD became mandatory for truck drivers, we all saw an increase in truck rates. So because now basically DLD is there, is recorded, and so now there is less. I would say that even there is like a 30. If I remember well, every 8 hours of drive, there has to be a 30-minute break. So there are more regulations that come with DLD. So the efficiency of the truck of a truck got reduced because of DLD mandate, and they reduced the efficiency because of DLD mandate, which by the way, it's a good thing because it translates in increase the safety, because all the Department of Transportation wanted to do with the ELD is to increase safety. So this is a good thing, but the bad thing is that the DLD reduced the efficiency of each truck prior to DLD, so that caused rates to go up. So that's kind of that's my take on this.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I like to tell people is just with the log situation the way it is now, once a driver starts his day, the time is started for the day, and extending it isn't, the options are a lot more limited to extending his hours for the day. So he needs to be as productive as possible in that 11 hours. So he can get the 11 hours of driving in, is 14 hours total, but he just needs to be as productive as possible in that time span. And that's why limiting any extra, trips or wait time at docks is so critical right now.
I do have a question while we're on the slide about the border delays and border crossing best practices. As you all know, there are a lot of delays, especially on the southern border between the US and Mexico. I do have several articles out there that have the delay times, and this is straight from US CBP updates and what they're doing at the border in order to add more staff there. Just 2 weeks ago, border delays in El Paso were 14 hours, for example, coming northbound from Mexico. So, I'm happy to send you those links. So reach out to me and I can send you updated information on border delays and border crossing best practices. We do have several recorded webinars on that, both for Canada and Mexico. So also reach out to me and I will send you the links to those.
Here's a brief overview. We'll leave it there for you to kind of look at, but it kind of talks about and it kind of shows you how a driver's day is kind of limited. They have, once their day starts, they have their 14 hours to get everything done. Even if they didn't drive full 11 hours after the 14th hour, they're basically done into their next break. So that's just kind of the high points of it. It'll be there for you to look at when you receive the slides. And here are some fun facts about the trucking industry.
I think we'll just kind of leave this in and we'll, just because we're kind of running out of time, but you guys, I'll send this out to you. They're just fun to look at. I know a lot of you guys were interested in hearing a day in the life of a truck driver. So we are going to have Luigi tell us basically his daily practices as the owner of R2R Intermodal. So Luigi, do you want to tell us how you start your day and what you got going on?
Sure. Yeah, well, normally appointments at a warehouse, normally we have, there are more imports than export containers in the United States. So normally a driver has an appointment at a warehouse. The majority of appointments happen between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. That's when warehouses normally want to take cargo in. So there are the driver normally gets up very early in the morning. It can be, if he has already pre-pulled a container the day before to our yard, then he can leave, depending how far it is, on a 100-mile driving distance, it could take like, it's a commercial truck, it's not a car. There is pre-trip inspection involved. There is the pre-trip inspection can take between 15 to 20 minutes to get going in the morning. But normally they wake up at 4 in the morning. They get to the truck yard by 5. They do pre-trip inspection. They drive to the warehouse. They get to the warehouse between like 7 and 8. The hope is that the cargo is unloaded between 1 to 2 hours, and then they come back if there is no street turn. And street turns are not very common. Street turn, I would say 20% of, on a rough average, 20% of import containers are street turned. And as we move along, there are platforms that enable visibility of import containers. So more import containers will be visible for a street turn. So I do expect the street turns to improve in percent of import containers that are being street turned. But anyway, the driver comes back with the empty container. If there's no street turn, he has to return the empty. And then if he's on time, if there is an afternoon appointment, it's like a drayman, it's like a local move within 100 miles. Maybe the same truck can make 2 trips, or if the driver goes far, like 200 miles one way and 200 miles back empty, then it's done. But it's definitely it's early morning. There is a lot of commitment. It's not easy. It's not easy to be a truck driver. It requires you have to constantly have. I still have a CDL myself. You have to be on high alert all the times. You're driving 8 hours, 10 hours per day, high alert all the times. Kind of it's not easiest job. It does. That's pretty much what my point about it.
Thank you for that. And that's just for a drayage service, for example. So obviously a local truck driver will be different. We've got our over-the-road drivers, our sprint vans and hotbots. I mean, everybody's different, but we really do appreciate that perspective.
Thank you.
I am going to land here. We've got a couple minutes left for some questions. We had some LTL questions come in. So if we could touch on those, that would be great. The first one is, what affects LTL rates more, weight or miles?
Your weight is going to be the predominant factor there. Obviously, the length or the distance involved will, play into it too, but the weight is the biggest factor.
Terrific. I've got several questions here in regards to LTL and packaging. This client wanted to know, what are some of the driver struggles in regards to LTL packaging?
So the best thing to do for the for LTL shipments, the more condensed down that you can have it nice and neatly palletized, makes things that much easier for the drivers to get it on and off the trailers with for less damage. That would probably be my biggest recommendation there.
Okay, and then this is a really loaded question. We've got, this client wanted to know some ideas on ways to eliminate finger pointing on how the boxes were damaged.
That's a good question.
So,
yeah.
As far as the shipper goes, if you can take photos before it's loaded, it depends on how big your operation is, whether or not that's feasible. But photos when it's loaded is definitely one way to show the condition that it was handed off to the LTL carrier in, and that way we can see what condition it is when it arrives. The other thing is, a lot of the LTL carriers now do have cameras on the dock. It'll be at their larger break bulk facilities. Some of the smaller ones may not have them yet, but basically as they pull the pallet off, they'll back away from it. Overhead camera will snap a picture of it. It does a couple of things. You can see the condition of the pallet. It also has a dimensionalizer in it, so it's taking the dims of the pallet as well. So they're checking what's on the bill of lading that we put on there to make sure it matches. And then obviously they can weigh them if they need to too. So I would say those would be the biggest things, is if you can get a photo of it there, and then we can kind of work backwards from there if there is an incident.
Okay. I think we're good on our questions. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Tony or Luigi. You will be receiving this presentation from me directly, and feel free to just reply off of that email as well. And we will follow up with an LTL. Log into our portal so you have access to that. And thank you so much for joining us. Luigi, thank you very much for being our guest speaker today. And Tony, thanks for the amazing presentation.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.